So first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to share some of the work we do with organizations. So let's get into it. There's only a few slides, and this is kind of going to probably want to appeal to managers in the room, but also individuals, but it's really just to highlight some of the things that we see or get asked to work with in our work with organizations. So, brilliant. So just to explain who we are, I represent a professional body, BCS. Our focus is on the IT and digital profession, and that slide there really talks about one of our main focus, and there may be some members in the room, but also some of the fronts we work on, so with schools and education. So it's a very, very broad search, but today I'm focusing in on frameworks. So we are a membership organisation, which is fantastic, and you have access to some of the frameworks we'll talk about today if you are a member. But today is really just to kind of explain, if you're in an environment where they use some of these frameworks, today's main ambition is to kind of explain how to get the most out of them. If you're a manager, how you can utilise them to support your teams, for instance. So I'm just looking down here. And why they're important, I thought in the limited time, 8 minutes and 30 seconds, it's good to share, I think, how organisations talk about these challenges. So we try our best to understand them and adapt on the ground. So this next slide is one from a recent, an organisation of mine working, well not mine, but who's partners with us in the Republic of Ireland, a bank, with a raft of challenges. And it's important, I think, how they, when we talk to organisations, they want to, this just describes one key challenge that they're trying to tackle. But we go to great lengths to engage with the managers and the staff members to explain quite clearly what it is we're trying ultimately to achieve, and try not use jargon whilst we're doing it. So for the organisation, if we're using frameworks, and I'll talk about two in particular that we work a lot with, it's around consistency of language that helps people understand what they're doing, going to the individuals now. So they have clear guidelines as to the scope of their role, their impact on other roles in the organisation, but critically, particularly in this day and age, how that individual can move around the organisation, not just vertically, but to understand, if they're using frameworks, how this particular skill set may lend itself to other roles in the organisation. And I'll talk about that and the mechanics of that in a bit more detail in the next few slides. So the frameworks in question, that we work a lot with are something called SAFIR, which is the Skills Framework for the Information Age. It's been around for 20 or so years. It's on its 9th iteration. It's informed by industry, so it has this level of robustness, and you could argue maybe some future-proofing as well, which is something we get asked to try and tackle. And the Government Digital and Data Taxonomy, previously DDAT. Those are mostly used by UK government and local authorities, but in my experience, any government department will also use SAFIR or versions of that framework as well and combine the two together. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but it's quite an interesting challenge to blend the two together, and I might touch on why they choose to do that later. So again, I'll just do a little bit of a deep dive into SAFIR because it's been around so long. It's quite broadly used. You can read these yourself, and I can't read that from over here. But it talks about its history, how it's used. I've spoken briefly a moment ago about how it's informed by those in the field. So we go out, and the SAFIR Foundation goes out to subject matter experts. And it's that bit of information that organisations are most keen to exploit. So how are the professionals and experts in the field doing certain things being skills, and should we be using those sorts of skills in our organisation? And it just begins to set the tone for a more productive sort of journey for people in their career. So flying through that. I understand you get a copy of these slides, so I don't need to dwell on this, and I'm quite conscious of the time. So that's a little bit about Sophia. Again, we do tend to take the trouble to explain what it is. We're not saying that is how things are done from now on. The objective really is to take elements of Sophia and weave it in to an organization's current set of role profiles as an example. But again, we're reiterating to people that when you see Sophia, we'll look at a version of it in a moment, but it's all about progression and development and being mindful of how subject matter experts in the field are describing and behaving in order to be successful. So if you're junior in your role, software testing is always the example I take. It very aptly describes the skill of software testing, which will be a part of a broader role potentially. But it gives you a lot of detail. It also tells that individual, okay, well, as I move on through my career, what does the evolved skill look like? And we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a sec. So that's broadly how it's used. It is a learning and development asset. So the thing we get asked and have been for the last few years is around not only providing clarity and consistency to role profiles, which is a typical activity, then people benchmark and identify where their strong points are, where they need to focus their development. Organizations see the underlying data for all of this, and it begins to inform their workforce plan, recruitment, et cetera, et cetera. But that's all quite difficult to achieve unless the individual has understood what's in it for them. But if you're using frameworks and you want to be an attractive organization, say when you're working here, mobility is improved because you can see the various connections between your current role and other roles in the organization. It's one of the things we focus on, and I think we're quite successful. So I'll talk a little bit now about, not a plug for BCS, but we have and maintained since since Sophia was created back in the 2000s, we maintain a granular version. So when the Sophia Foundation iterates the framework through public consultation with subject matter experts inputting into that process, we then go back out to our communities, which are pretty broad, and we ask them about the details. So if you are again, software tester, instead of describing the skill and the skill at the level, what work activities do you do? What technical behaviors what behaviors do you sort of present, etc., and what qualifications you might have as well. So a really detailed version, and that's useful for a number of reasons. So I'll step back. So some of the detail we go to, and organizations find attractive because they can weave in their work activities or their background or their specific knowledge and skills. And again, it's really important if you're ever involved in capability management and encouraging people through their career to be able to describe a role or a skill in detail. It gives people the opportunity to break down their journey towards maybe they're moving from a BA to a solutions architect. So that level of detail is useful. Again, if it's useful for managers to maybe set the tone for certain development discussions as well. So I put that picture in. It's impossible to get on one slide. It's a huge document, but it's a list of all the skills that have been identified through those public consultations. Again, we're on the foundations of its 9th iteration, and it's clustered into sort of skill types. People in this room are probably looking in and around probably the purple area, yellow area. And this is an example of an expanded skill, so that unique to BCS. And if you're a member, you have access to this as well. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time just explaining the structure. So we've got Sophia describing, or the industry describing, what requirements definition of management is, what it means to possess that skill at a particular level. And again, that will be one of a number of skills in your role profile, potentially. And with BCS, if you're using membership or you're using some of our systems or working with us directly, you have access to an additional level of detail. So again, if you're working with a team of people, it's useful to be able to describe that skill in terms of typical work activities, backgrounds, behaviors, training, professional development activities, and qualifications as well. suffice, goes without saying, we do have systems to help manage all of that, but I won't talk about that today. The last slide touches on its complexity. But again, I wish I hadn't switched these 2 slides around there, but if you were, I borrowed information from the Sophia Foundation, sophia.org, and in their work across the globe, they come across various role profiles, and they can be a little bit misleading in terms of their naming conventions, but they've shared some of them here. So if these are some of the roles that they and their broader community and consultants are creating, just to get into the detail, these are the sorts of skills within that framework we looked at momentarily that might be appropriate. At what level, I don't know, but it could depend on whether you're building a junior or senior role. But these are the kind of skills. So if you are a BCS member and you have access to Sophia Plus, which you will, and you're in there, and some of these naming conventions resonate with you, those are the skills you might want to look at. Last slide. And this sort of why the presentation was quite challenging in 10 minutes is to talk about what is actually achievable if your organisation has chosen to use one of a number of frameworks. So again, this slide was penned, as with the previous one, by a particular organisation with a bit of guidance from myself. But these are the kinds of things you can begin to tackle. So if you're in workforce planning, some information, but if you're in an organisation who happens to be using one of those frameworks, hopefully I've given you a few pointers as to how they're built, how they're constructed, and how best to use them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions?